Welcome, members. I was on mute. My apologies. Welcome, members, to this meeting of full council, which is here specifically to consider the 21-22 budget for this council. So moving to the agenda, the first item, roll call. Vice Chairman, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillors Allen.
Present.
Ash Edwards.
Present.
Bates.
Present.
John Belsey.
Present.
Margaret Belsey. I'm present. Alison Bennett.
Present.
Liz Bennett.
Present.
Boutrock. Bradbury. Brown.
Present.
Branston. Cartwright.
Present.
Chapman.
Present.
Clark.
Present.
Cogan White. Coote. Councillor Coote. Cornish.
Present.
Thank you. Cromie.
Present.
DeBell.
Present.
Demir.
Present.
Dempsey.
Present.
Eggleston.
Present.
Ellis.
Present.
Eves.
Present.
Gibbs.
Present.
Gibson. Hatton.
Present.
Henwood.
Present.
Hicks.
Present.
Hillier.
Present.
Hussain.
Present.
Jackson.
Present.
Knight.
Present.
LeBand.
Present.
Andrew Lee. Anthea Lee.
Present.
Llewellyn Burke.
Present.
McNaughton. I think I have seen Councillor McNaughton.
Present.
Marsh.
Present.
Mockford.
Present.
Peacock.
Present.
Phillips.
Present.
Orfer.
Present.
Salisbury.
Present.
Smith.
Present.
Barashi.
Present.
Stockwell.
Present.
Wetman.
Present.
I know our chairman is here. We've had apologies from Councillor Walker, Councillor Webb, Webster,
Present.
and Whitaker.
Present.
Thank you,
Chairman,
Councillor.
I am here, Councillor Gibson. I had an internet drop out at precisely the wrong moment.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. I'm sure we've noted that.
Thank you.
Vice Chairman, thank you. And members, moving on to the meeting explanation now, as usual, from the Head of Regulatory Services, Mr. Clark, please.
Thank you, Chairman. This meeting is being held in accordance with the regulations that were issued in April 2020 to allow for virtual meetings, given it's impossible at the moment to have in-person meetings. Members are in charge of their own microphones and will be called to speak by the chairman. Tonight, as I think members know, we have our yes and no buttons back to use for voting. But on this occasion, the final vote on the budget has to be a named vote, so I will conduct that as and when we get to it. And as usual, if you could stay in position at the end of the meeting, until the live streaming is turned off. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Members, moving back now to our Vice Chairman. Vice Chairman, could I ask you to read the prayer, please?
Thank you, Chairman. O Lord, grant us courage to strive for what is right and good, courtesy to listen to those of different opinion, strengthen us through difficulties and pressures, and guide us in our deliberations so that we may act in the interests of all in our district, to the glory of your holy name. Amen.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Moving now to item 3 on the agenda, to receive questions from members of the public pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 9. This evening we have one question. Before I ask the member of the public to put that question, I'll just outline the usual points around public questions. Members of the public have 2 minutes to put their question. And I emphasize that it should be a question and not a series of statements. If it is a series of statements, I will ask the member of the public to cease, and I will not ask the member of the public to speak again. I will then ask the relevant cabinet member to answer that question. And the member of the public can then have a supplementary question which must relate to the answer that has been given by the cabinet member. And again, if it does not, I will ask the member of the public to cease and will not ask them to start again. The answer to the supplementary question will be provided in writing by the cabinet member. I hope all that is clear. So the member of public this evening is Mr. Brooks. Mr. Brooks, are you in the chamber, please? Mr. Brooks? I can see that you have a name that, Mr. Brooks, I think I see you. Mr. Brooks, good evening.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you perfectly well, thank you. Please put your question, Mr. Brooks.
Okay.
Mr. Brooks, we are waiting. So it's are you back with us, Mr. Brooks?
I can hear you again. I think the connection isn't great.
I think we can hear you, but we cannot see you. Please start your question, Mr. Brooks. In which case, I will put your question for you, Mr. Brooks. It seems that we have a connection issue. I hope that is acceptable. So Mr. Brooks's question is as follows. As the UK takes presidency of the G7 and we head towards COP26, PM Mr. Boris Johnson has announced an ambitious 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. The Environment Bill is passing through Parliament and, building on the world-leading pledge to meet net zero emissions by 2050, Mr. Johnson has set a target of a 68% fall in emissions by 2030. Does the Council have its own clear roadmap in line with this? And what plans are there to show direction and leadership at a local level to support community engagement? Members, that was the question from Mr. Brooks. I'm now going to ask Councillor Belsey, Councillor John Belsey, to respond. Councillor Belsey, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Brooks, for the question. The Council has had a sustainability strategy in place since 2018. This strategy sets out the leadership role the Council has in encouraging and enabling sustainable initiatives and developments. Importantly, it also sets out the Council's own contribution to sustainability. However, we recognise that we can go further, particularly in post-COVID recovery, but also in the light of the emerging Environment Bill, which we hope will receive royal assent in autumn this year. You will hopefully be aware that our current corporate plan commits to the development of a new sustainable economy strategy. This will bring together two strategies that need refreshing in light of the pandemic, but that are also critical for our COVID recovery. This will provide a clear roadmap to the delivery of the full potential of our district without compromising the needs of our future communities. And of course, it will take account of new and emerging legislative requirements, including those set out in last year's Environmental Bill, and which is currently working its way through the parliamentary process. I'm sure all members and residents will welcome that the bill is intended to provide a legal framework for environmental governance, as well as making provision for specific improvements of the environment, including measures on waste and resource efficiency, air quality, water, nature, biodiversity, and conservation. Your question is timely in that the first steps towards the development of this new council strategy will be presented to the Scrutiny Committee for Leader, Finance and Performance next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Belsey. Mr. Brooks, are you back with us?
I'm hopefully back with you. Yes, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, and I can hear you and see you. Mr. Brooks, if you have a supplementary question, please put it. But as I say, that must relate to the answer provided by Councillor Belsey. Mr. Brooks, we cannot hear you. Okay, Mr. Brooks, I think we're going to have to draw a line under this. It's one of the perils of virtual meetings, I'm afraid. But thank you for your question. And the members of Democratic Services will assist you now in leaving the chamber. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, may I please make my apologies for being late to the meeting?
I'm pleased to see you, Councillor Coote. Thank you. Moving on, members, to item 4, which is confirming the minutes of the meeting held on 27th January. I've had no notifications on the minutes, so I will move us directly to the vote. Now, we are using, and I've just lost you. What's happened to my screen? Members, can we temporarily cease things? I have lost my connection. I don't know. Well, can you mute me? I don't know quite what has happened. The screen has disappeared.
Mr. Chairman, we can hear and see you.
We can hear and see you.
Hang on, I'm joining again. My apologies. We were just talking about the perils of virtual meetings. Can you mute? Can you?
Councillor Margaret Belsey, could you please assume the chair, please? Thank you.
Oh, the grand old Duke of York.
Yes, you can. You just got to take them to side of six.
We're on 4.
Well, don't go through.
Right, I think I'm back in. Okay, I think we're back in. Members, my sincere apologies. Yeah.
You got terrible feedback, Chairman.
Yes, I know. I have my. I'm trying to.
Councillor Margaret Belsey, could you assume the chair, please?
Good evening. It's Councillor Margaret Belsey here. Can you hear me?
Well, Margaret, I'm actually back in now.
You're okay now?
Yes.
Well done, Colin.
My apologies for this. Oh God. Oh, and now would you believe it? I'm on 2 things at once. Oh, jeez. No, the
Councillor Margaret Belsey, just in order to allow time for this matter to be resolved, could you please resume the chair? Thank you. We were on approval of minutes, Margaret.
Okay, fine. Is that we're on item 4?
Yes.
Item 4, to confirm the minutes of the meeting of the council held on the 27th of January. Have we got any queries or comments on those minutes? If not, we're going to members to use the yes and no voting buttons on their screen, please. If you could all vote now.
Thank you, Chairman. That is carried by a majority of 44 in favour.
Thank you. Vice Chairman, I think my system is back up and running. I'm on only one system now. And members, it's ironic, is it not? Remember the public, we were talking about the vagaries of virtual meetings and suddenly this happens. Once again, my apologies. Moving on now to item 5 on the agenda to receive declarations of interest from members in respect of any matter on the agenda. Do we have any declarations of interest, please? I see none. Okay. So moving on now to item 6, to consider any items that the chairman agrees to take as urgent business. I have none. And item 7, chairman's announcements. And for this meeting, there are none. So we now move swiftly to item 8, which is recommendations from Cabinet held on 8th February. I understand that Councillor Wellenberg, you are proposing this.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. May I proceed?
Please do, yes.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Chairman. Good evening. Recommendations from the Cabinet meeting are described in the paper, and these are against a background and report of a projected net overspend of 1.93 million at the end of this financial year. And further lockdown measures have been put in place since the end of December, of course. So I'm now going to move on to summarise the recommendations for approval. The first is that in view of the uncertainties in the future opening of our leisure centres due to the ongoing pandemic, the recommendation from Cabinet is that item 5.1 is that the Council approves the transfer of £500,000, £500,000 to a leisure COVID support reserve, which will help lead to transparency to the support given. Moving down the list of recommendations you have before you, items 2 to 7 are self-explanatory. They are all items where grant income is to be transferred to specific reserves. Item 9 is the more detailed variations to the capital programme, and these are as follows. The balance of monies payable to fulfil our plans to acquire temporary accommodation. So this is the £1.4 million agreed to purchase 5 properties. The upgrading of the document management system, the upgrading of play equipment at Skeins Hill, which you will have seen on MIS, £43,000, and the Hurst Farm development costs, which have increased by £48,000. Also in a capital variation is the St John's Park playground improvements, which will be informed by the outcome of the play master plan and will therefore be completed in 2021-22. And the work in St John's Park follows on from the not inconsiderable investment that's been made in improving the pavilion there. Revenue projects included in the report are the About the Place public art project and the installation of electronic access gates to John Pear's recreation ground tennis courts. And as usual, the business case for all of these items has been made and has been seen by Cabinet and is available for public viewing. The final recommendation for approval is the debtor in respect of Horsham District Council's contribution to the Census Partnership, which was aired quite thoroughly at the Council's Audit Committee meeting yesterday evening. That's all the recommendations which I would like Council to approve, please, from the Cabinet meeting, and I'm happy to take questions. Chairman,
sorry, before we move on again, things are playing up here. Councillor Ash Edwards, I understand you're seconding this. Do you wish to talk now or reserve your right?
I'll reserve my right to speak at the end if necessary, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Henwood, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Item number 10, how much debt is going to be written off, please? Thank you.
It's £115,000.
Thank you.
Okay. I see no further indications. So I will move now to Councillor Ash Edwards, please. You are seconding this.
Thank you, Chairman. I suggest we go straight to the recommendations. Thank you.
Indeed, thank you. Members, we now move to the vote. And using the yes, no buttons, please start your voting process now. Thank you. There are 46 votes in favour, so that is carried. Moving on now to item 9, which is the corporate plan and budget for 21-22. And this is covered in pages 17 to 24 of your pack, and you've all had the budget packs also. Councillor Ash-Edwards, you are proposing this. And in your proposal, could you please make members aware of the latest update that has been circulated on the budget? I'm aware there has been some. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd like to formally propose the recommendations and the adoption of the 2021-22 budget and corporate plan. And you're right that members' attention is drawn to the very minor update that was circulated to the paper, which just corrects the council tax figures for the year ahead. And I'll highlight in my remarks the update received by Cabinet in relation to this year's budget proposals. Chairman, the full council last met in person in the chamber almost exactly a year ago to the day to debate the current year's budget and corporate plan. I reread the minutes today and was reminded that a councillor asked in that meeting about the council's scenario planning given the uncertainties the country was facing at that time, just a couple of weeks before what became known as lockdown. And my reply noted in the minutes was that the council has demonstrated an ability to be agile in the face of external influences and has well-established business continuity plans. And the last year has certainly proven that is the case. Over this last year, the council has worked at unprecedented scale in establishing new services like the business grants programme and support for vulnerable residents, in keeping going existing services with rising demand, in responding to an ever-changing picture as leisure centres, outdoor facilities and our local economy closed, opened, came under tighter restrictions and closed again. And in continuing to pursue our priorities to ensure Mid Sussex continues to be a great place to live and work despite everything that's going on around us. But the truth is the last year has come at great cost to our country, and indeed we are still counting the cost as a council. Factoring in the impact of the current lockdown, it is likely that the current year will result in a deficit of over £2 million, as the Deputy Leader highlighted in the previous item, which will need to be funded from reserves, even after the very considerable support received from government has been utilised. It's too early to know exactly what the long-term financial impact of the pandemic will be and at what time the greatest costs to this council will subside. These include reduced income from services and higher costs of providing services, as well as subsidising the closure and reduced capacity of leisure centres, the biggest financial challenge we face. But we do know this. Firstly, although we present a balanced budget tonight, we are doing so only as a result of windfall income from business rates retention as a result of the Rampion wind farm development. Without that, a much greater draw on reserves would have been required this year. That was the update that the Cabinet considered last month. And secondly, the Council's finances are not on a sustainable footing over the medium term. Unless there is a significant and quick bounce back in the economy and income that the Council receives, and a reduction in costs, neither of which should at this stage be taken for granted or assumed, the Council's reserves will reach a perilous position within the next 4 years. We cannot allow that to happen, and will need to take corrective action over the coming couple of years. A failure to do so will mean that the council will not be able to continue providing the kinds of services and pursuing the kinds of projects that we do on behalf of our communities. Regrettably, therefore, a 2.9% increase in the district council share of council tax is necessary for the next year, and the council tax support scheme means that those residents on the lowest incomes are supported with the cost of this bill. Chairman, the vaccination programme has given people across the country hope, and the latest NHS data shows that over 42,000 Mid-Sussex residents have had their first jab, which is excellent news. And while we mustn't take the progress we're making as a country for granted, the gradual reopening of our economy and society over the coming months means we can begin to look to the future with slightly greater certainty than we've been able to of late. And the budget and corporate plan builds on the revised plan that the council adopted in September with some clear priorities: to support the economic recovery, This must be our overriding priority and one on which we must not be neutral. We must focus our efforts on supporting local businesses and jobs and ensuring Mid Sussex continues to be a great place to work and run a business. Like the work being done with Mims Davies MP and the Department for Work and Pensions to help people get back into work, ensuring that young people in particular can maximise the opportunities being offered by the new Hayward Heath College. Like the rollout of our infrastructure programme with tens of billions of pounds currently being spent on improving connectivity in Burgess Hill, providing new infrastructure at the Northern Arc, pushing regeneration for projects wherever possible, and the rollout of gigabit speed full fibre infrastructure. The last year has brought home, like never before, the importance of digital connectivity, and the impact of it not being good enough is significant for people needing to work, to learn, or just to stay in touch. Our full fibre programme is putting around 2,500 metres of fibre in the ground every week as we connect the district up like never before. And as that project reaches its pinnacle this year, our attention must turn to how we use that investment to stimulate economic growth and innovation amongst local businesses, ultimately creating jobs and prosperity in our district. And in the coming months, the examination of the site allocations planning document means our aspirations for a nationally significant science and technology park should move a step further forward. The work to be done this year to create a new sustainable economy strategy will set the course to ensure Mid Sussex is able to have a green recovery in line with the world-leading environmental and carbon reduction policies being set by the government. And this year has again demonstrated the value people place on their local environment and its contribution to our well-being. So we will continue the parks improvement plan to ensure that key parks that sustain the centres of our towns and largest villages are high quality and great places for recreation, leisure, or just relaxation. And throughout the year, we will work to redesign our waste and recycling service to introduce food waste collections, possibly the single biggest environmental benefit we can bring about as a district council. And finally, Chairman, supporting vulnerable people has never been more important. One of the most acute challenges in our local community is the record numbers of people, sadly, in emergency accommodation. That's despite the millions of pounds of investment the council has put into purchasing its own housing stock for the first time for temporary accommodation, simply a result of the pandemic and its economic impact moving faster than we have been able to. Over the next year, the single biggest element of the capital programme in this budget and corporate plan is the provision of affordable housing and temporary accommodation for our residents. So, Chairman, those must be our priorities for the year ahead, supporting the economic recovery, ensuring we can have an environmentally friendly recovery, helping vulnerable people in our communities, and the critical task that cannot be ignored of beginning to rebuild the council's finances after the impact of the pandemic. And Chairman, I hope tonight we can take a step to work together to get through the pandemic and look forward to what I'm sure will be much better days ahead for Mid Sussex. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ash-Edwards. Councillor Llewellyn-Burke, you're seconding this. Do you wish to talk now or reserve your right?
I'll reserve my right, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Llewellyn-Burke. Now, one moment, please. Okay, thank you for your patience, members. I'm wrestling with doing this on an iPad, whereas I normally use my Mac. Members, I see no indications yet, and if that is the case, I'm aware that Councillor Hicks has an amendment. Councillor Gibson, I'll take your question first.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got one observation and then a question, if I may. My first observation is that the headline here is a jump in the revenue budget from 14 million to 17 million. And I think as a headline that actually stands out. I do understand what's behind it, but I think it's an interesting point that hidden behind those figures is quite a lot of movement in terms of income and also expenditure and possible threat within that to each. I would like to congratulate the officers on a balanced budget. If there was an element of luck in it, that's fine. Napoleon, I think, was grateful for lucky generals, I think. And we should be grateful for a lucky finance director in that case. My question really relates to the comments that you've made about years 2, 3, 4, and 5 and the decline that we're going to see, obviously, in terms of the call on general reserves. And I recognise that that is a situation that we will seek to address. And I just wonder if the leader could say something about what plans are there at the moment, perhaps in the context of the science park, the type of scientific facilities that we might attract there, what industries are we going to see coming in there. Noting with some disappointment that Gatwick was not accorded Freeport status, which I think was a disappointment today, but also that there is obviously money in order to bring manufacturing facilities back into the district. And I would totally applaud that. And I think there's a little bit of disappointment that the vaccine manufacturing facility did not come into the Crawley area, which of course has a large history of pharmaceutical endeavour. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. A number of interesting observations, but a question around Science Park. Councillor Ash-Edwards, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I mean, without wanting to be glib about it, I mean, what we need to do to bring the budget into balance is to make sure that we're not spending more money than is coming in. And you know, there's a number of points to that. Firstly, I think there is just a little bit of time, I think, before we will fully know what you might describe the structural deficit might be. Clearly there are things that will improve as we go through the roadmap that the government has set out. We should hopefully reach a point where leisure centres are not closed anymore, when potentially the impact of social distancing restrictions might begin to ease on those. That means in the long term, we might see some improvements in the amount of support the council's currently having to provide to leisure centres, and clearly a lot of the income of most district councils is tied to the economy. And clearly there's been an impact there, and we would expect to see some improvement as parts of the economy begin to reopen. But I think it's not yet possible to fully understand, even if we were to go back on the 21st of June to what some people might describe as normality, exactly what deficit is left as the way people work and the way people travel, and whether people go into car parks in the same way, and how people use services. The likelihood is that will have changed over the period of time of the pandemic. So I think it will take a little bit of time just to understand what will gradually begin to come back into balance itself, and what we'll be left with. And we will need to take corrective action over time. I think we can do that in a careful way. We've used reserves to underpin the council's work, and there's clearly scope for us to continue to do that to an extent, but it can't be unlimited or indefinite. And so we will need to look at the things that we've always looked at as a council, in terms of making sure we are providing services as efficiently as we can, making sure that we are seeking to diversify the council's income base as much as possible, and we'll need to do that as quickly as we can in a way that is sustainable and deliverable. And as I said, it's just going to take a little bit of time to make sure that we can make the right decisions in doing that when the full picture is much clearer. I think on the broader point around the economy, there are some really big opportunities for us. I think Councillor Gibson's highlighted a few of them. The fundamentals of Mid-Sussex haven't changed. We are a very well located district with a very talented, skilled population, and lots of people wanting to live here for all of the reasons that we all live here, because it's a great place to live in. And what we've got to do is make sure we're maximising those opportunities. Clearly the Science and Technology Park will be one such. See, it's clearly the public examination on that still to happen, but we've already done a lot of work with the Department for International Trade, for example, to ensure the opportunities that offers is being properly showcased around the world, and that we can attract the very best in the way of investment and new innovation that will ultimately create the kind of good, well-paid jobs that we want to see more of. And I think there are some very encouraging signs that will become clearer of that beginning to happen. And what we need to do is make sure that we're continually banging the drum for Mid-Sussex. I think we've demonstrated to a very significant extent the ability to get money in from government for infrastructure, to be able to attract people to invest in Mid-Sussex. And there's clearly a continuation of that needed, and many more projects that we need to get forward. But I think we can all work towards that, Chairman, based on the knowledge that we do have of how to deliver for Mid-Sussex.
Thank you, Councillor Ash-Edwards. Councillor Alison Bennett, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, everybody. I have a comment to make and also a question for Councillor Ash-Edwards. Firstly, I think I speak for everybody in my group when we say that we truly recognise the very difficult situation that the council has found itself in this year, and to have come to a point where there's a budget that's balanced and to be voted on. We can only applaud Mr. Stewart and his team for having got us to that point, so thank you very much. I'd also like to thank Mr. Stewart and Councillor Ash-Edwards for their time and consideration of our questions and possible amendments. There obviously have been compromises that have needed to be made during the course of the pandemic in terms of the corporate plan and programme that the council wants to progress. One of which is the sustainability agenda, which I think everybody on this council agrees is essential. And so whilst we recognise that it wasn't possible for the council to progress that in the last year, we very much welcome and look forward to debating the sustainability programme that's coming forward to scrutiny initially next week, and looking forward to working constructively on that. My question stems from having been contacted by a few people this evening, is will Mid-Sussex be applying for a grant from the £408 million Cultural Recovery Fund that was announced in the Westminster budget today for Clare Hall, or for that matter for any other venue in the district? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Ash-Edwards, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd like to firstly thank Councillor Bennett for the constructive way that her and her group have raised a number of points over the past few days, which hopefully assists with this meeting. It's been very useful, so I'd like to thank her for that. On the points around sustainability, we committed in the autumn in the revised corporate plan to undertaking work on a new sustainable economy strategy. I referenced that in my remarks, and that is one of the key projects for this budget and corporate plan for us to take forward over the next year. And I think in just trying to bring together the council's sustainability work and the economic development work that we do, I think we have an opportunity to ensure that we are making the most of the green recovery, and ensuring that we are able to maximise for Mid-Sussex the work that the government is doing, and the UK's hosting of COP26 this year, to make sure that we are doing everything we can in Mid-Sussex in that direction. In relation to the Cultural Recovery Fund, I am afraid I haven't seen the details of that announcement following the budget today, and normally with these kind of announcements, takes a little bit of time for the details and prospectuses involved to be released by the relevant government departments, but it is always the case that the council will always look carefully at grant invitations from government, and will consider carefully whether it is appropriate to make proposals if we believe the criteria are met. And so we will clearly do that with this fund, as we would normally do with other funds the government makes available.
Thank you, Councillor Ash-Edwards. Members, I see no further indications. Councillor Hicks, you, I understand, have an amendment which you wish to propose.
Yeah, that's correct, Chairman.
Okay, given that, as I outlined at the beginning of this meeting, that the purpose of this meeting is to consider specifically the 21-22 budget, and I believe your amendment is somewhat more general than that. Do you still wish to continue with that?
Yes, it still relates to the budget and the effect that has.
Okay, please propose your amendment.
Thank you. I think that the budget itself, when combined with the other authorities, means total council tax for the average and the taxpayer increasing by 4.9% or £92. And the overall rate is now over £2,000 for some parishes in mid-Sussex. We heard today from the Chancellor putting off tax increases for at least another year, but not so for local government. And we've seen above inflation increases now for 6 years in a row. And whilst I support the district council precept this year, as we know that COVID has put big holes in it, particularly relating to our leisure centres, the councils, and I know the council's own tax element comprises just 9% of the total precept. The total cost levied relates to is equivalent to about a third of what the average employed person living in mid-Sussex pays in income tax. An average Band D council taxpayer in the lowest 20% of income earners last year paid £1,000 after extra government subsidies out of a disposable income of just under 17,000. Whereas one of the top % of earners paid just double £1,800 out of a disposable income just over 91,000. In terms of council tax bands in England, are still based on property values of 30 years ago. Since then, the average house price in our district by over 5 times. Most valuable property, Band H, attracts just 3 times as much tax as the lowest. And we see a person living in a house valued at 600,000 today pays the same as one valued maybe 5 million. So our amendment aims to highlight these issues. Council tax itself is grossly unfair. There are growing disparities between those who've maintained their incomes in lockdown and those less fortunate who've suffered financially, or what we term as the squeezed middle, the not quite poor, who aren't eligible for benefits. And it's younger people, those just starting out, that are hit the hardest, paying a much greater proportion of their income. This unfairness will only continue as time elapses. Council tax was meant to be regularly updated, as indeed business rates are, but there's been no such uprating. Solutions such as revaluation, adding more tiers at the end of the higher end, or replacing it with more progressive tax system are all viable options. And the support by politicians of all parties towards this objective. And a similar motion was adopted by Kent County Council, but with support from all parties. Therefore, I would urge all councillors to support the amendment in terms of calling for a fairer council tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hicks. Councillor Jackson, I understand you're seconding this.
Yes, I'd like to second it formally and reserve my right to speak later.
Thank you. Members, I think, well, the amendment, proposed amendment was circulated by email, but I think so that we know what we are debating and we know subsequently what we are voting on. I'm going to read that out. So I want to make sure that everyone has those words in their mind. And I will read out the amendment as it is stated. At a time when many of our residents are facing static or falling incomes, it is particularly important that we are able to demonstrate fairness in how the burden of paying for local services is shared. That the council recognises that council tax is out of date and often arbitrary and regressive, the burden of which falls unfairly on mid-Sussex households with limited incomes. Consequently, increases in council tax, together with other authorities' precepts, will fall disproportionately on those least able to pay. The council notes that any change to the current council tax bands and charging structure needs to be sanctioned by Parliament. The council therefore agrees that the leader of the council to write to the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government requesting that the current council tax bands and charging structures in England be reviewed as a matter of urgency, so that they better reflect people's ability to pay the tax. That is the amendment which is being proposed and seconded. Members. I have Councillor Ash Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman. As the amendment proposes that I start writing, I probably should respond. Firstly, again, thank Councillor Bennett for advance sight of the proposed amendment, which is always helpful. And this is probably an area where there's just a kind of slightly philosophical difference between different political parties. I think very few people would say that council tax is perfect. I'm acutely conscious that it's one of the most visible taxes that people pay out of their taxed income, as Councillor Hicks already said. But of course, imperfect systems do not automatically mean that reforms would make them better. And it is interesting, I'll just make as an observation, that successive governments have shied away from council tax revaluations. I'll just make a couple of observations, Chairman, because this is obviously a policy matter solely for government and for Parliament, and not something within the control of this council. But firstly, revaluing council tax bands will create winners and losers. Clearly, it's implied in the comments that Councillor Hicks made that an objective would be for some people to pay more. And clearly that needs very careful consideration, because council tax is a means of contributing to the costs of local public services and not being a wealth tax. There are other taxes designed for those purposes. And very simply, the consequences of council tax revaluation mean that some people will pay more and some people will pay less. And that clearly is something that one might advocate when looking at national policy. But I think we do need to just be really clear about what that means in Mid-Sussex, because it almost certainly means more people in Mid-Sussex paying more. And that is particularly the case for those who are house price rich, and often those same people are cash poor. Having the £600,000 house that was described does not mean that you necessarily or automatically have the means to pay higher council tax. And I think there are other ways of ensuring that people who can shoulder a heavier burden in contributing to the costs of public services are doing so. Indeed, actually the actions that the Chancellor has taken today would be a good example of how that can be done in a way that combines ensuring that we are competitive in our tax system, whilst also ensuring that those people who can bear it do contribute more. And finally, Chairman, I just want to also just remind the Council that the Council Tax Support Scheme does insulate people on the very lowest incomes from the burden of council tax, providing either a full or partial discount to those least able to pay. And over the course of the last year, we've received funding allowing £150 uplift to the discount provided to those on the lowest income in Mid-Sussex during the pandemic. And so I just wanted to make those comments, Chairman, and the Conservative group is unable to support this amendment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ash Edwards. Councillor Gibson, please.
Yeah, sorry to come back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to talk on this. The point that I would like to make is that I mean, clearly I have lived through, sort of the poll tax issues and all the rest of it, and seen, sort of exactly the chaos that change can cause in the country through things like that. My point that I want to make is that I don't think you can fix the council tax band system, and revaluation is long overdue, without looking at the social care budget as well. So if you were going to do this, you'd want to look across the piece. And of course, we know that social care and the NHS are intimately linked together. So I just make that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Members, we do not want to stray above our pay grade, but these are interesting points, but we must be aware of what we as a district council can action and do. Councillor Brown, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I've just heard the leader of the council's comments there, and I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed. Looking at the well, first of all, I'm disappointed with his comments. I'm not disappointed with the efforts that the council have made to come to this balanced budget, albeit that it is a makeshift, as we all know. But the situation, looking back over the last 4 years, is that the council, this council's budget has gone up by roughly 3% a year, so that's 12% over 4 years. But the combined budget of the county council and the police and crime and police and parish councils has gone up by 16%. So that's 4% a year. So,
Councillor Brown, can I just interrupt you if I may? We are talking about the amendment here being proposed by Councillor Hicks and seconded by Councillor Jackson.
Yes, I'm coming to that, Chairman. Can you hear me? I'm coming to that. So the ability of people in smaller homes, A, B, and C bands, has been compromised year on year, and that's increasing to the extent of this year's about £75 on a band B house or dwelling. Now, the support grant of 150 is welcome, but I just can't really I can't really support this motion at all, the substantive motion, really, without some commitment from the council to recognise that it is unsustainable for so many people. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Stockwell, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just carrying on briefly from that, obviously this is all part of the budget and corporate plan that we're looking at. And again, as you say quite rightly, this is about that amendment. Now, this amendment could have been brought to or discussed at the scrutiny committee, which was held was in February, I believe, or January. Thank you. At that meeting, we had ample opportunity because the papers were issued at least 6 weeks in advance of the meeting, and there were certainly plenty of other opposition members in that meeting, and we had a very good and fruitful discussion about the budget and the corporate plan. So any sort of amendments like this, I feel, should really have been brought up at that point, so they could be fully discussed within the scrutiny committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stockwell. Members, I see there is one from Councillor Alison Bennett. Councillor Bennett, please.
Thank you. I mean, firstly, to Councillor Stockwell's point, I seem to remember exactly the same point was made in the budget meeting a year ago, that if you've got an amendment, it needs to be brought up at scrutiny. Unfortunately, not all of our ideas come to us prior to a scrutiny committee, much as I'd like to have them all oven ready by then, but it's just not the way we work. And we've been working kind of quite solidly all the way through February as a group on what we wanted to bring to this meeting tonight. And I think it's right that we do so when we have ideas that we think are worth sharing. And my second point was to Councillor Ash Edwards' opening remark about philosophical differences. And I think it would be wrong to assume that this proposal comes from a place of deep political difference between us and more left-leaning colleagues or more right-leaning colleagues, more liberal colleagues, more authoritarian colleagues. That isn't what council tax reform is about or where it comes from. And to that point, you can discover for yourselves, if you like, that there is a group within the Conservative Parliamentary Party called the Property Research Group, with 29 MPs in it, led by Kevin Hollinrake, and they are committed to reforming property taxes, both stamp duty and council tax. So don't just write this off because you think it's some sort of liberal nonsense or something. Think about it seriously, because there are people in your own party who think that if the Conservative Party is serious about its levelling up agenda, it needs to do something to address the problems that those on lower incomes and younger people disproportionately face in terms of the expense that council tax has on them and their capacity to afford to live where they wish to live. And I would probably close with the quote I found, which I thought really captured it, the simplicity of what we're talking about here, which is that the case for council tax reform is rather like charging VAT at a lower rate on Bentleys than on Fords. And I don't think anybody here should really think that that is fair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Webster, please.
Thank you, Chairman. At the outset, the leader said that the fact was that there would be winners and there would be losers. And unfortunately, in mid-Sussex, to just arbitrarily look at council tax without looking at the whole package of taxation would render more losers than winners. And for that reason alone, I wouldn't be able to support this, because it would be tinkering with the fringes when I suppose there's an engineering analogy to this, that you're trying to repair a puncture when the entire engine is packed up and needs a new whatever they need. And I mean, I'm sorry that just on the clear basis of fairness, I can't support this at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webster. Plenty of motorcar analogies this evening. I see no further indications. So, Councillor Jackson, you have indicated. I'm going to come back to you now as seconder for this motion.
Right. Thank you, Chairman. I've sort of heard the proposition and the various comments. I certainly like to say that the delay in doing a revaluation of the properties has meant there have been a number of anomalies which have been carried on for a number of years, which ought to be resolved. But I think the main thing here is we want to have fairness in the scheme. Those who can afford to pay should be paying more. And that's usually people in the more expensive properties. So I do accept the fact that there are some people who are asset rich but cash poor. But my particular argument is that fairness should be overall principle, and that should also reason why I will be supporting this amendment. Well, I've seconded this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Members, with an amendment, it is normal to go back to the proposer of the substantive item, which in this case would be Councillor Ash-Edwards. Councillor Ash-Edwards, you spoke earlier. Do you have anything to add before we move to a vote, please?
Nothing further. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Then, members, I will move us to the vote using the buttons that you know, and the 30-second process on that starts now.
Mr. Chairman, are we voting for the amendment?
We are voting. Thank you for asking on the clarification, Councillor De Mere. We are voting on the amendment at this stage. And I am desperately trying to find the buttons myself. Yes. No.
Chairman, there's a problem. Every time I vote, it disappears. Can we go for a recorded vote? I'm pressing no, and it's disappearing as everything else has just disappeared.
Let me just, I want to make sure we're all right on this. Let me just check with my. Members, Democratic Services assure me they are picking up all of the votes, and Councillor Marsh, if your vote is not recorded electronically, Democratic Services will pick it up and count it. So can we confirm whether we have all the votes in now?
Chairman, on a point of order, can Councillor Marsh clarify whether he's voting for or against the motion for the public record, please?
Definitely not for the motion.
So it's 28 against and 16 in favour, so that amendment is not carried. And now, members, we move back to the substantive item, and I will now move us to the vote on that. Members, I want to be sure that we all understand the recommendations. Thank you. I have just been reminded quite correctly that Councillor Llewellyn-Burke, as the seconder for the substantive item, needs to speak. Councillor Llewellyn-Burke, please, and my apologies for forgetting you.
Thank you, Chairman. To summarise, I'd like the council second the recommendations. Further to the leaders outlining the full and complicated corporate plan and budget. It's a very difficult time for us. There have been new issues arising as a result of the pandemic, and we will do our best through this budget to support our businesses, residents, and especially to help vulnerable people. We need to build towards the future. This budget leaves us in a position where we can build towards the future, but also deal with an uncertain future. I'm very pleased that we are as well placed as we are in this situation with the financial management that this council's done to date, that we have the reserves that will be able to pull us forward over the next few years, but quite cognizant that we need to be able to deal with the ongoing deficit and the uncertainty ahead. So I'd like to second this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Llewellyn-Burke. Members, now I will move us towards the vote. But before doing so, I want to be clear on the recommendations, please. These are listed, a number of them, on pages 18 to 22 of your packs. And I'll just summarise those. They fall into three parts. Recommendations under 3.1 cover those that refer to the approval of the corporate plan. Recommendations under 3.2 cover those that refer to the approval of the council's expenditure. and recommendations under 3.3 cover those that refer to the council's responsibilities for calculating council taxes for the Mid-Sussex area. So with that, please, we will now move to a vote. And as Mr. Clark indicated at the start of this meeting, votes on budget are recorded votes. So Mr. Clark, can you please take us through the process?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Allen.
For.
Councillor Ash-Edwards.
For.
Councillor Bates. For. Councillor Belsey. John Belsey.
For.
Councillor Margaret Belsey.
For.
Councillor Alison Bennett.
For.
Councillor Liz Bennett.
For.
Councillor Bradbury, I don't think is with us. Councillor Brown.
Abstain.
Councillor Brunston, I don't think is with us. Councillor Cartwright.
For.
Councillor Chapman.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Cogunner-White.
For.
Councillor Coote.
For.
Councillor Cornish.
For.
Councillor Cromie.
For.
Councillor DeBell.
For.
Councillor Demir.
For.
Councillor Dempsey.
For.
Councillor Eggleston.
For.
Councillor Ellis.
For.
Councillor Eaves.
Abstain.
Councillor Gibbs.
For.
Councillor Gibson.
For.
Councillor Hatton.
For.
Councillor Henwood.
For.
Councillor Hicks.
For.
Councillor Hillier.
For.
Councillor Hussain.
For.
Councillor Jackson.
For.
Councillor Knight.
For.
Councillor LeBand.
For.
Councillor Andrew Lee, I don't think he's with us. Councillor Anthea Lee.
For.
Councillor Llewellyn Burke.
For.
Councillor Norton.
For.
Councillor Marsh.
For.
Councillor Mockford.
For.
Councillor Peacock.
For.
Councillor Phillips.
For.
Councillor Pulfer.
For.
Councillor Salisbury.
For.
Councillor Smith.
For.
Councillor Sprashy.
For.
Councillor Stockwell.
For.
Councillor Swetman.
For.
Councillor Trumbull.
For.
Councillor Webb.
For.
Councillor Webster.
For.
And Councillor Whitaker.
For.
Chairman, I have 46 in favour and 2 abstentions.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. So the budget for 2021-22 is carried. Thank you, members. Members, that concludes our business for this evening. As I said, tonight's council was specifically to look at the budget for 2021-22. Thank you for your contributions. And I formally close this meeting, therefore, at 19:15 hours. And as ever, members, please wait until Democratic Services tell us we can switch off our equipment. Thank you and good evening.